There are stories you hear in childhood that never quite let go of you. They cling like the scent of smoke on a winter coat, drifting from memory to memory, always half forgotten until the moment you hear them again. In the villages surrounding the lonely hill of San-Issidro, one such story has been told for centuries. The story of the Black Book. The monastery itself rises above the landscape like a sentinel carved from shadow. Its stones are older than the nation of Spain itself, weathered by 900 years of wind and rain. No road leads directly to its gates. A narrow path winds through the thorny scrub, climbing steadily upward until the forest gives way to open rock. From a distance, it looks abandoned. Up close, it feels watchful. Locals avoid the place after dark. Even in daylight, they pass by quickly, muttering a prayer under their breath. Ask them why, and you'll hear vague answers. Bad luck up there, or things best left alone. Nah, but press harder, and you'll catch fragments of something darker. Of a book bound in strange leather, written in words no man should speak. They call it El Libro Negro. The story goes back to the 12th century, to a monk named Brother Ferran. He was a quiet man, known for his skill in copying holy texts. But over time, the other monks began to notice changes in him. He spoke less, worked more, and sometimes they swore they heard him whispering to himself in a language older than Latin. At night, the candlelight in his cell flickered long after Compline, casting restless shadows along the cloister walls. No one knew what he was writing until the night the abbot broke into his chamber. What he saw was no scripture. The page before Ferran was so black it seemed to drink the lamplight, yet strange letters glimmered upon it as though written in liquid silver. Ferran's hand moved without hesitation, tracing shapes that made the abbot's heart hammer in his chest. The abbot ordered the pages burned. Ferran laughed, a low, joyless sound. "You cannot burn what has always been," he said. A week later, Ferran was dead. The book, his book, was locked away in a chest deep beneath the monastery. But it was not gone. The other monks began to dream strange dreams. One novice awoke screaming and claimed to have seen Ferran, his eyes black as ink, standing at the foot of his bed. Bread turned to mold overnight. Water in the cistern turned dark. Within months, the monastery was abandoned. Officially, it was due to structural decay. Unofficially, it was because the brothers feared what they had brought into their home. The gates were barred. The location of the Black Book was entrusted to one man and passed down only in whispers. But secrets do not stay buried. In the centuries that followed, there were sightings. A shepherd swore he saw a pale light in the scriptorium window. Travelers reported hearing chanting in the hills, though no one lived there. And every few decades, someone vanished. Always a stranger, always one who had shown too much interest in the monastery's past. In 1903, a Madrid scholar named Tomás de Alvear came to the village, asking questions about medieval manuscripts. One morning, his room was found empty. On the desk lay a single sheet of pitch-black parchment, bearing 3 words, "Open the door." Tomás was never seen again. Today, most dismiss the story as a folktale, but in certain corners, among historians, occultists, and those who have walked too far into the forest, the Black Book is still spoken of in careful, measured tones. They say it does not kill, it calls. And when you answer, you will never leave San-Issidro. Miguel Serrano had always been drawn to forgotten corners of history. As a freelance historian, his work rarely took him beyond dusty archives and neglected municipal libraries. But when he stumbled upon a half-rotted ledger from 1903 mentioning a missing Madrid scholar, last seen near San-Issidro Monastery, something in him shifted. The name leapt out at him, Tomás de Alvear. Miguel remembered that name from an obscure footnote in an occult treatise he'd studied years earlier. A treatise that spoke of a black page that swallowed light. The coincidence was enough to send him packing a small bag, booking a one-way ticket to the sleepy village at the foot of the San-Issidro hill. The locals were polite at first, until they learned why he'd come. An old man selling bread told him flatly, "Don't go looking for that place." A woman in the tiny cafe muttered something about the monk who writes in the dark. Miguel's curiosity burned hotter with every warning. On his second night, he was approached by a wiry shepherd named Juan. The man spoke in a low voice, his eyes constantly flicking to the darkened street beyond the cafe window. "You're not the first to come here asking about the monastery," Juan said, "but you might be the last." Juan's grandfather had been a boy in the early 1900s when Tomás de Alvear vanished. He'd seen the stranger walking toward the monastery at dusk, clutching a leather satchel. The next morning, Juan said, there was no stranger, no satchel, just the paper. Miguel asked what was written on it. Juan shook his head. "I won't say it. Words have weight." That night, unable to sleep, Miguel spread his notes across the small desk in his rented room. He tried to map the timeline. 12th century, Brother Ferran writes the Black Book. Monastery abandoned, exact year unknown. 1903, Tomás de Alvear disappears. Now, Miguel's arrival. The problem was the gaps, centuries unaccounted for. It was as though the monastery's history had been deliberately erased. The 12th century, the birth of the book. The further Miguel dug, the more the monastery's founding years came into focus. It was built during a period of violent border skirmishes, serving both as a religious sanctuary and as a fortress. Ferran was a gifted scribe, tasked with copying sacred texts brought from distant monasteries. But something changed after the arrival of a traveler from the east, a man who stayed only one night, but left behind a satchel of unmarked scrolls. Ferran was the only one who dared open them. According to a surviving fragment of the Abbey's chronicle, Ferran's writing began to differ. His letters curled into shapes no one recognized, margins filled with symbols that looked more like talismans than punctuation. Some monks claimed they heard voices behind his closed door. One brother swore that when he touched the manuscript, his skin blistered. After Ferran's death, the abbot sealed the book in an iron chest, binding it with 3 locks. But by then, the damage had been done. Dreams, shadows in the cloisters, and whispers that the book did not contain words at all, but instructions. The 19th century, the return for almost 700 years, the monastery lay in ruin. But in 1899, a small group of Benedictine monks attempted to restore it. They found the structure decayed, the crypt flooded, and the library half collapsed. In a report sent to the Archbishop of Madrid, one monk described a black-bound volume stored in a locked iron chest beneath the altar, its pages in perfect condition despite the damp. The report ends abruptly. No record exists of any further correspondence. Within 4 years, the monks were gone. Locals claimed the bells rang at midnight without a hand on the rope. Others spoke of shapes moving through the cloister arches on moonless nights. And then came Tomás de Alvear and the paper. The present, Miguel's descent. On the 4th day of his stay, Miguel found the path. It was little more than a goat track, half swallowed by weeds. The climb was steep, the forest pressing in on both sides. As he neared the crest, a sudden hush fell over the land. No wind, no bird song, just the sound of his own breathing. The monastery gate stood ajar. Inside, the air smelled of stone and dust, but beneath it was something else, a faint trace of candle wax and iron. The courtyard was empty, yet Miguel felt certain he was not alone. In the scriptorium, he found a long table scarred with deep grooves. On it lay a single sheet of parchment, black as coal, the surface shimmering faintly. He reached out and froze. From somewhere in the cloisters came the sound of a quill scratching on paper. Slow, deliberate. He followed the sound through a narrow passage into a dim chamber. There, seated at a desk, was a figure in a hooded robe. The man's face was pale, his eyes dark as wet ink. His hand moved steadily across a black page, silver letters blooming under his quill. Miguel's breath caught. "Brother Ferran?" he whispered, half mocking, half terrified. The figure did not look up. Instead it spoke, a voice like dry parchment, like centuries collapsing in on themselves. "You've come to read." The Black Book of San-Issidro. Conclusion. Miguel stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to run. Yet something in the monk's voice, an ancient patience, a weight of inevitability, pulled him closer. The silver letters on the page writhed subtly, like living things. "What is this?" Miguel's voice trembled, despite his effort to sound calm. The monk dipped his quill into an inkpot so black it seemed to swallow the candlelight. "A record," he said, "and a promise." Miguel realized with a jolt that the letters on the page weren't in any script he knew, and yet somehow he understood them. They formed words that weren't read, but remembered as if they had always been inside him, waiting to be awakened. The monk paused, the quill hovering. "Every name in this book has read its own line," he murmured, "and every name has obeyed." Miguel took a step back, heart pounding. "I don't want to be in your book." The monk finally looked up. His eyes were not eyes at all, but deep pools of ink, rippling slightly as though something beneath the surface stirred. "You already are." Miguel turned and fled. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, the cloisters doubling back on themselves. The moon outside was wrong. Too large, too close, its light pouring over the stone in syrupy silver. When he finally burst into the courtyard, the gate was gone. In its place stood only the high wall, unbroken. Behind him, the slow, deliberate sound of the quill began again. 3 days later, a shepherd found him wandering at the base of the hill. His clothes were torn, his face pale as ash. He clutched a single sheet of parchment, black, faintly warm to the touch, on which a single line of silver script gleamed. The shepherd couldn't read it, but he swore the letters seemed to move when you looked too long. Miguel never returned to Madrid. He stayed in the village, working quietly at the library, never speaking of the monastery again. But some nights when the wind shifted just right, he would stop whatever he was doing, tilt his head and smile faintly, as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. The whisper that remains. You might think this is only a tale, a fireside legend, but somewhere hidden among Spain's forgotten hills, there is a monastery with no history, and in it, a man in a hooded robe still writes, one name at a time, in silver on black. They say that if you dream of the book 3 nights in a row, your name will appear in its pages the next day. No one can say how the book finds you. Perhaps you've already heard the scratching of the quill in your sleep. Perhaps even now the letters are forming. After all, you've just read this far, haven't you? If you value your name, keep it out of the book. And if you dare to learn more, subscribe to this channel, because the next story might already have you in it. Leave a comment if you've ever had a dream you couldn't shake, one that felt older than you, and share this with someone who sleeps too soundly. They might need a warning, but remember, some pages turn themselves, and when they do, it's already too late.